Hey everybody, thanks for stopping by today, and I've got another exciting video for you in regards to the Power Platform and components, specifically the component hierarchy. Now some of you are having a love-hate relationship with them. When I say them, we're talking about components, right? And so here's a recent YouTube comment that I got from somebody. Let me bring this up on screen here. And it says, I was pissed off when I could not differentiate the difference between input and output property types. Thanks a lot. And so that's just a repeat of the frustration that I hear from people out there regarding components and the Power Platform and how to get their heads around it. Because components are all about reusability, and reusability is more rooted in object-oriented programming and creating functions. And a lot of times low-code, no-code developers, because they don't have a rich development background, are frustrated because they don't get those concepts. And then conversely, the seasoned developers are frustrated by the Power Platform because they're constrained, right? It's low code, no code. They can't get in there and do what they're used to doing in another way. So in any event, I want to try to solve another major pain point that I hear all of the time, where people say, components suck. I can never get them to work. And other people are like, you know, they're the best thing ever. I mean, they save my time, right? They're using them the way that they should be used. So let's kind of break this down a little bit and let's look at it. But in order to understand it, actually, I'm going to shut down the video here. So let's talk about components in your application, right? So we're talking about application level components. And inside of our application, we have things like screens. And the screens will have the component instance that we create, and typically one or even more. And not to digress, but just so that you at least have the full picture. I would be amiss if I didn't at least get into the full Power Platform here, right? And so you can package up and put into the application a solution. And so that's great. But also, and normally environments sit on top of the solution, or solutions sit in environments, but in this particular use case, as it relates to the component framework, you can attach a environmental component framework in a solution as well. So that's why I've got the environment framework inside of the solution, even though technically it's also the other way around, where the solution is inside of the environment. All right, so all we're going to focus on in this video is this particular aspect. And so let's jump over actually into the Power Platform to take an example look at this. So here is a traditional, I'm in a component, by the way. I'm in an application. I've created two components, and I've got this very, very simple function, okay? This could be JavaScript. I think it might even be JavaScript the way I've got it written here. But in any event, this is traditional programming, right? If I was going to create a very simple function, so first all you do is you give it a name, and then I'm going to give it two input parameters that's going to take the, these numbers that I'm going to add in, and I'm going to add them together. And you can see it's plain English, right? So if we look at it, we have the name of the function, which is called _comcalc supported parameter 1, parameter 2, which means when I call this function, I'll call it by the name, and I'll pass in parameter 1 and parameter 2, which I'm going to have its data type set to integer or number, so that I can take these numbers, and then I'm creating a variable called sum, and then I'm going to add the numbers together, and I'm going to store it in the sum variable. And then I'm just going to return that sum when it's all done and it's added. Very, very simple, right? Understanding the code is not important. I just put it there for those of you that may understand code. Maybe this would help you wrap your head around how it works in this low code, no code platform. All right, so the other thing to talk about in components is there's two aspects of this component. There's the supported version, and then there's the unsupported version, okay? So what do I mean by that? So by default, let's go over and look at this. By default, this is what we get with a parameter. I mean, what we get with, not parameters, but what we get out of the box with components that are supported, right? This is native Power App functionality. We don't have to go in and flip switches or turn anything on. So let's look at this. So first what you do is you create a component. Let me delete this out so you can see the process, because this is how it looks for everybody in a Power App, right? They got a screen, blank screen, nothing's there. You go to components, there's nothing there either. If we go to add our first component, it'll give component 1. And then you can either rename it here by clicking here and choose rename, or you can come up here where the little pencil is and you can rename it over here. Irregardless, doesn't matter. So the first thing that we need to do is to, say, what are we going to do with it? Now, a lot of times, let's talk about the supported components. They'll use this as a way of creating headers and footers. So they're visual graphical elements, right? And so you can do that. And that's a perfect best use case scenario for using components. Matter of fact, that's probably the #1 way that everybody uses it. However, when you start getting into the lot more advanced techniques, or you find yourself writing the same block of code from screen to screen to screen, and you're copying and pasting like large chunks of code, right, all rolled up into this little tiny area. It's frustrating, right? Because this is a low-code, no-code platform. But a lot of times what we do is create complex validations, complex functionality, and so we're jamming like football fields of code inside of this field, and it scrolls on forever. And if you came from a traditional background, you may be saying, isn't there a way I could just make a function and make this thing work better? And you can. So that's the other way of using components. So I'm going to show that to you here, because I think everybody that's used components or have tried it, they're not going to have a problem just dragging and dropping some stuff on the screen like a header or a footer and then just referencing that on each of the screens, right? So that's in and of itself pretty straightforward. Lots of videos out on the internet about that. However, let's look at the custom properties. So we give it a name here, right? I don't know, I'll just call it Q here, test. Probably makes more sense. And so we got this new property called test. And so now we've got a description, and now we've got to make a decision property type. So what does that mean? This means that the property on our custom component is going to be allowed to receive data in from our application, and or we can set it as output, meaning the component is going to send something back out to the application. Okay, so that's how you got to get used to thinking about it. It's coming in from the app, or it's going out to the app. All right, and so in this case, we're going to create what's called a headless component, meaning we don't really care what's on the screen. There's nothing that's on the screen that really needs to be there, because we're going to create a function. It's just going to do something like calculate 2 numbers. And so this is all you get. There's no parameters. There's nothing else there. And the data types are pretty much all the same as well. Okay. Now recently they've added this thing called Access App Scope. I'll get back to that a little bit later. But in any event, this is all you get. Now if you want to turn on parameters and or get to a third option under property type, you have to go under File. You're going to have to go under Settings, Upcoming Features, Experimental, and then what you want to do is scroll down to where it says, where is it? Oh, there it is right in front of my face. Okay, Enhanced Component Properties. You're going to have to toggle this on. Now, as soon as I do this, if I get out of here with that on, I'll delete this because I want it to pick up from the new setting. New component. Now, watch what happens. So here we got test again. Our input type, now we have behavior. So behavior is an event, an on click, an on change, and on whatever, right? It's a custom behavior event that you can set the trigger in action outside of the component in the app, okay? And so at that point, we're not going to talk about that one so much here in this particular video, although I do have in the other video an example of a behavior, so you may want to go watch that other video. However, there's this parameters option now, okay? And so now that you see what the difference is between the two of them, let's dig into my other application. And so this is what I've got. I've got this one is supported, and this one is the preview. Okay, that's where we went in and toggled the switch. So in other words, I've set this particular component up to only work within the confines of what's there and on by default. So if you don't go in and flip the switch on that setting, you'll be able to create components just like this one to do what you need to do in your apps. So let's look at this. Again, this is a headless app. I only put this visualization here on the screen for you to see, but when I call this instance on the screen, I can hide it or I can shift it off screen. Again, I showed that in my other video as well. But the point is, it's a function. It is not pretty. It's nothing to interact with that a user is going to click on and do whatever. It's just calculating. Okay, so let's look at the elements of it. I've got 3 properties. I have 2 inputs and I have 1 output. And the reason for that is because I need a number for the parameter and I need another number for the second parameter. So those are my ins. And then I need to return the sum after I've calculated, and that's the return result or the out property. So let's look on the screen where I've got this done. So here's the loading app. Here's the supported screen. Now I've got this divided into 2 particular areas. On this side, this is the component, right? Or a component instance. And we can see it. It's down there. It's got the name of the component _1 because it's the first instance of that component that's used in the application. And that's why I said component instance level. And now we have this thing called the screen level. These are fields, and all of the stuff is on the screen. It's not in the component, it's on the screen. Okay, so let's just look at this and see what it does, right? So it says enter number 1. We'll add 55, and let's do 55 again. And 5 plus 5 is 10, 55, 55, 110, right? So it works as expected. And so the problem is getting this to work like expected is really interesting because a lot of us think differently, okay? We either think one of 2 ways when it comes to Power Apps, okay? And half of us fall into the right way, which just, you got lucky, right? You may have had dumb luck, and that's why you're getting components to work in a functional setting. Others of us think differently or in reverse, almost like dyslexia, right? But we approach something logical from a reverse standpoint. I fall into that category. I'm one of those pissed off people that when I first tried using this, I couldn't get it to work, and life of me couldn't figure out why. That's one of the reasons for this video, and for comments like that, and for the people that I help. I've run into this or heard this happen quite a bit. I apologize, the phone's going off here. But in any event, what's important to know is that how you wire up information from the screen to the component is the problem, okay? So let me just tell you what the right way to do this is and how it works right, and the wrong way to do it, which is how I did it and how I see others doing it that get frustrated. I mean, absolutely pissed off to the point where they throw mice, okay, and break their mouse, and then they go on Amazon and have to buy a new one. So you may be thinking, if we go back to the, I guess to the PowerPoint, right, which is this slide here, the application, the screen, and the component, this all matters. We've got to approach things from the lowest side up, not from the top down, okay? And that will make more sense when we get into this. So here's an approach of the top down. And let me break this really quick. Well, actually, let me show you how I've got it configured now, because this is the right way. And then you'll see how to configure it another way, which is the wrong way, and it won't work. And the reason it's not going to work is because we're going the wrong direction. We're coming from the top down, where we need to go from the bottom up. So I guess if you don't want to watch this video any further, here's the bottom line takeaway, or the key crux to all of the information that I'm trying to teach you here. Anytime you have a component, wire things from the component and grab things and get information from the screen that it needs to do, and you're not going to go wrong. If you try to go from the screen level to talk to the component and push things into the component, it's never going to work. It's going to break. You're going to have hell. You're not going to know what's going on. You're not going to get errors, and I'm going to show that to you in a minute, but it just doesn't work. And it's maddening because you don't know that you're going in from the wrong direction and saying, here is an example of the way that it's configured the right way. So I have 3 custom properties that I created for this. If we look at it, we see number as property, or number property as parameter. And the reason I said as parameter, because this is just an input property. I'm using it as a makeshift parameter because on the new unsupported preview, there is parameters that's in there. But if you want to use this in production, use this method because it's not going to change. It's part of GA. All right, so number as property as parameter 1. I got number as property as parameter 2. And in this context, I don't see the return, right? But I do have access to the return over here where I'm calling the component instance and I'm able to access that return result because it's output. When I'm trying to configure a component, right? It's not input. I'm not setting properties to anything. It's inaccessible. It's only meant to provide information out, which is why you don't see it in the list. So that's the first clue between that comment that I showed you earlier where the guy was all confused about what was in and out, and he himself was getting super pissed off about it. All right, so let's look and see how this is configured. I'm in input property, parameter 1, okay? It's not really a parameter, it's just an input. So what I'm doing is I'm reaching out to an object on the screen calling inp-1. That's the name of this box. If we look down here, inp-1, and its text value is what I'm grabbing over here. Also notice that the text box, I've got it format over here set to number. Its default is text. So just know that if you configure it like I've configured it, but you didn't flip the switch on this input property to number, then you're going to have to take what I've got here and wrap it in a value function to convert the text into a number. But this input mask essentially is only going to allow numbers, so there will never be any text allowed anyway because it's an input mask, and I can leverage a feature inside of the Power Platform that will help me just get the information I want. But just know that that's going to be potentially your first screw up right there, especially if you try to copy what I've got here and you're like, Dave, I did what you did and it didn't work. Well, that's another area that you could get hung up on. But the key though is again, from the component, I reached out to something at the screen level, and you see I've got this down here. Now, here's how I've seen people do it, right? So this is blank by default. There's no value there. And so what they do is they come over here and they're like, you know what? I'm going to use the onChange event. So they start scrolling down to onChange because here's what they're thinking. What I want to do is I want to take every time somebody types something in this box, so every keystroke, right? I'm going to fire off and or try to set that input property. And so you can see that here. I'm saying the component, the input property, parameter 1, is equal to, and I wrapped it in the value function to make sure that it's a number, and I'm passing along the input self. In this case, I'm writing the onChange event in and of itself, so I just reference self for itself, and I'm including the text property of that input component. And so my thought is, hey, listen, every single time I provide a value, well, maybe not 3. So, but it's not working. If I just want to add 1 to it, it's like, it's not working. Why is this not working? And the reason it's not working because I'm going from an approach of top down. Notice I don't get any errors. The function that I wrote is perfectly valid. There's no errors at all, right? And so if there's no errors, you expect it to work, but it's not working. And you're like going in circles. And you know how it goes in a spiral when you can't get something to work and there's no feedback, but it just simply doesn't work. You start hitting the forums, you start cussing, you start throwing mice, breaking stuff. So this is why it doesn't work, guys. You went from the screen to the component. You went from the parent to the child. Go from the bottom up, from the child to the parent. And when you wire it up from the ground up, it works. When you wire it from the top down, it does not work. So that is the main takeaway here on that. Okay, so enough about that. Let's go over into the preview side. So again, you have to flip the switch on. Okay, so if we look at this over here, first number 2, second number 2, so 2 plus 2 is 4, and we know that that works. But how I set this up is different because I've turned on this switch and I'm using real parameters. So if I look at the properties of my component and I see that I have really nothing, there's nothing there. I can't set anything at all. And the reason for that is because at the component, if I go into preview, if I come over here, the only thing I have is the return result. It's a single output property. But in the output property, I have number 1 and number 2 as parameters. So when I call that particular property as an output property, I can pass into it 2 parameters. And so on that is where I can do the function. So if I'm in the component right now, okay? So because I'm in the component and I've selected the component, one of the options over here is return result. And so here's where I'm providing the calculation. I'm saying parameter 1, which is called number 1, because if you look, that's it, the parameters called number 1 and number 2. I'm simply just saying number 1 plus number 2, and it's returning the formula that's here inside of this screen. So then how do you use it on the screen? I don't do anything at all with this because this is essentially just a text box, and this is a text box. You don't wire it up to anything. It is what it is. However, in the sum, I do have to do this. I call my component. This is just like you would do in programming, right? You've got the component name, and I've got the input or the parameter. It's not a parameter, the property, and it's an output property, which means I'm going to get information when I call it. And so when I call it, I pass in the field imp number 1, which is the name of the field. So if I highlight this, you can see that that's the name of these fields. And so what I'm doing is I'm grabbing these as the parameter, the text values. And so I'm passing in the values that's typed into those fields, and that's how I'm able to do it. So I've got a much simpler component acting as a function with parameters. I didn't have to set up the additional 2. I didn't have to write as much code. And so this is the way it's going. And with the behavior option, there's some additional things that you can do there as well. But this is the difference between kind of what's supported, what's unsupported. Right now, this is unsupported. It's not in GA. If you use it in a production site, you can do it if you so choose, but they may change the requirements. It could break your app, your production app. So that's why I wanted to highlight and showcase both the supported and the preview versions of this and how you would approach it, and specifically how you approach components as a programmatic mechanism to do reusability on code logic. Because all of you guys have probably, like I said, thrown something graphical like a header or a footer and then just consumed it across the app, or even a menu. That's another great use case for it as well. But this is how you use it as a true programming mechanism to do reusability in your code. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Leave a comment in the comments, subscription, all that other fun stuff that everybody else on YouTube has you do. I'm not really big into all of that. I make these videos, and if somebody finds it, then great. I hope it helps you out. But anyway, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. That's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. Have a great one.